This is the Decibel Geek Podcast with Chris Czynszak and Aaron Camaro.
Before Kiss, there was Wicked Lester. This week, we go before the thunder with Lew Linet, the man who watched Wicked Lester evolve into Kiss. From Epic Records shelving the album to the formation of Kiss to early club shows at the Daisy, Lew saw the spark before the world heard the thunder. Here's our conversation with Lew Linet.
First off, honor to have you on. We are longtime Kiss nerds, and we're podcasters, so we're even more analytical and nerdy about the band's history. And you play a very crucial, significant role in the band's history. And I know some of you listening probably saw Lew's appearance at the 45th anniversary of the Daisy event that he was zoomed into a few years back. But I kind of wanted to get some of those stories on here too, and kind of get a good overview of what you went through. Bill Aucoin is considered the manager that launched Kiss, but a lot of people don't know Lew Linet was there before Bill Aucoin. And you go all the way back to the Wicked Lester era of the band, is that right?
Yes.
So how do you end up deciding you want to manage these guys that are just getting started in the music industry? What was it that sold you on them?
Well, I was friends with a publisher by the name of Ron Johnson in New York, who was also becoming a producer. And he called me one day from Electric Lady Studios, which was Jimi Hendrix's studio that he set up with Eddie Kramer. And he said, Lew, I've got this group here. I'm working with them. I'm being a producer here. And they need management. And I thought of you, that you might like to come down and hear them and see what you think. So I said, sure, Ron, I'll give it a shot. So I drove down to Electric Lady, and I walked in, and he said, here's this group. They call themselves Wicked Lester, and listen to them, see what you think. So I listened to them, and I did not care for them. So I thanked him very much. I thanked the members of the band. It was a 5-piece pop rock band, 2 guitars, keyboard, drums, and bass. And in there were 2 members, one by the name of Gene Klein, and the other by the name of Stanley Eisen, and then several other members. And so I thanked them and I left. I received calls continuously from Gene over the next few weeks or a month or two, telling me that they had made some changes. They had some new material. They had a couple of new musicians in the band. They replaced 1 or 2, and would I please come down and hear them again? So I said, sure, because they're very nice guys. So I went down, listened to them again, and this time they sounded excellent. Ron was doing a great job. The band sounded fine. I said, fellas, now that I'm hearing this new material, I like it a lot. Yes, I will take you on and manage the group. At that point, Ron told me that he was speaking with Don Ellis at Epic Records about the group. And I asked him if now as their manager, and I signed them all, now as their manager, would he like me to take over and get in touch with Epic? And he said, yes, of course. So I got in touch with Don Ellis, whom I knew because I was dealing with Columbia Records, the president of Columbia, Clive Davis, and with Don Ellis at Epic, partners with Columbia. And so I went and I brought a couple of demos for him to listen to. He seemed to like them. And he was kind enough to sign the group. And he gave us a $20,000 advance payment. Now, $20,000 50 years ago would be at least $200,000 today. So you see what a nice gesture that was on his part. So then the band continued to work with Ron Johnson at Electric Lady. And I'm trying to remember whether it's a month later or so or 2 months later, he finished the album that he was working on. And we made an appointment with with Don Ellis to show him the finished product, to get it released. And we all went up to the office, and there was Don sitting at his desk with his tape recorder behind him. And in we walked, Ron Johnson and the 5 members of the group, plus myself, with the tape in our hands, the roll of tape. CDs were not out yet, roll of tape, and gave it to Don. He put it on the player, and as I'm talking to you, I'm sitting there right now, right next to him at his desk. And he turned it on and he played it, and he made no expressions on his face. But when it was done, he said, "Guys, I'm sorry. I don't like it at all.
Wow.
I am not releasing it."
Wow.
"We're not releasing it." We didn't know what to say. We said, okay. He says, "I'm sorry. It's just not any good." So we left the office, and we're ready to go down the elevator. And I said to Gene and Stanley, "I'll have to look for another label for you, or do something here. Maybe get another producer. I'm not quite sure what to do, but I'll find out." So we left. The next day I called Don on the phone, and I said, "Don, we're friends. We're working together. I'm working with Clive and CBS and with a couple of acts. Would you do me a favor? If you're not going to release this album, would you be kind enough to drop the group from the label and let them keep the advance money, because it's already been given to them and I believe it's spent. They have no other income. So would you consider doing that?" He was so nice. He said, "Yes, I will drop the group from the label and they don't have to pay me back the advance money." It was really, really nice.
Can I ask you a question really fast? Yeah. So I'm just curious, because I've heard you tell that story before, and Gene and Paul have talked about, how Epic decided to shelve the record. But I don't know, so you were able to negotiate their way out of the label, and that was a great benefit to them because they could move on from then. But for other bands that didn't have a Lew Linet in their corner, if that happens, because I know albums get shelved all the time, especially in those days, where would that have left them if they hadn't had that option, that out at that time?
Well, there are a number of things that could be done. One would be to return the money that was paid to them and quit, voluntarily leave the label, or the label could ask for another producer to come in and do a couple of cuts and see what could be done, or to wait a few months, get some new material, listen to new songs, and then decide to give it another try. There's several options, but I felt that the best thing to do was to leave the label if possible.
So in that deal, then, are they able to keep the music that they'd already recorded?
Oh, yes.
Nice.
They kept the music that they recorded, and they just dropped them from the label, and that was it. And they were able to keep the money, and it was so nice of Don to do this. I always appreciated it.
Boy, I guess.
So I went home, and I thinking I'm going to have to get some new interest in this group. I liked the album. I thought it was a good album, and of course, in latter years, it was released. In other words, you can actually now buy the Wicked Lester album that was never released by Epic Records. It was sold. I don't know how it was done, but it was sold to somebody, and it was released. Anyway, I went home, and I'm thinking about what label to go to, and my phone rings, and it was either Paul or Gene. I think it was Gene. When I say Paul, it's Stanley Eisen, Stan Eisen, or Gene, Eugene Klein. It was one of them. I think it was Gene, and he said, "Lew, Stan and I would like to come over to your apartment and talk to you about something important. We have an idea." So I said, "Sure, of course, by all means, so come over." So at 8:00 that night, the two of them came in from Queens, came up to my apartment. I was on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and they sat down. And as I'm talking to you, I'm right there as if it happened this morning. And they said, "Lew, here's what we'd like to do." Gene said, "Stanley and I would like to leave Wicked Lester. Leave the band. We're only 2 members of the band. We would like to leave the band and start a new hard rock 4-piece band. Instead of a pop rock group, a hard rock group with only 4 people, 2 guitars, bass, and drums. And we would like to ask you, would you consider staying with us and helping us put this thing together? I said, guys, I'll tell you, I like both of you a lot. You're hard workers. I have a lot of respect for you. Yes, I would be honored to do that. I will stay with you. We will stay as a team. I said, so I thought that was the end of the conversation. At which point Gene says, one other thing, Lew. He says, you know, my name is Gene Klein. I think Klein's a little too Jewish for rock and roll. I'd like to change my name. And there's this actress in England. Her name is Jean, Jean, Gene Simmons. And I like the name Simmons. And my name is Gene, Gene. And I'd like to change my name to Gene Simmons. So I said, oh, okay, done. And then Stanley says, and Lew, my last name is Eisen, and Eisen is a little too Jewish for rock and roll, I think. So I'm a Paul McCartney fan, so I'd like to change my first name to Paul and use my first name, Stanley, as my last name. So I'd like to become Paul Stanley. So I said, okay, it's done. And they left because I said, we'll have to make arrangements. I'll have to find rehearsal studio for you. We'll have to audition players, but okay, we're done. So as I said to people before, to me, it was amazing. At 8:00 in my apartment, walk in Gene Klein and Stanley Eisen, and 1 hour later, exit Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley.
It's so wild to think about that because they're just young kids and go, you know, I think I want to change my name, you know, and it's because, I mean, you think of their history or where they went on to do, but these are just a couple of young kids right here. When
the album got shelved, they claim that before they came to you and decided that they wanted to break off on their own, that they went back to the rehearsal loft or wherever it was they were. I think it was on Canal Street. At the time, said that the loft had been broken into and all of Wicked Lester's gear had been stolen. Do you remember that?
I don't recall it. It may have happened, but I just don't recall that. What you're saying, what you're saying rings a little bell, and I'm not sure if I heard it from you or from somebody else, but I don't actively remember that. I mean,
well, and let's hone in on Wicked Lester a little bit. So you got Brooke Ostrander, Tony Zarella. At the end of Wicked Lester, Ron Lejack on lead guitar.
Yes.
What do you remember about those guys? What were your impressions of them as people and musicians? And what was the chemistry like with Paul and Gene and these guys? Did you get the feeling right away that they were already looking towards greener pastures?
No, I never got that feeling. I was kind of surprised to hear from them that they wanted to leave the band. And as for the other 3, I didn't know them very well because we hadn't worked together. They weren't working anywhere. I wasn't getting them an agent or publisher or anything of that nature. It was all new. It was all demo type, just starting out. So I really didn't converse with the other members very much. The 2 guys who were in touch with me all the time were Gene and Stanley. As for the other 3, they were excellent musicians. I thought they were very fine, but I didn't have any relationship with them because our relationship with the whole group was so short.
Right, and I know the group did do a small handful of gigs. I was just researching for this today, and I found an article that I thought was interesting about Brooke Ostrander, and it was an article talking about when Wicked Lester had played the 9th grade dance at a middle school in Linden, New Jersey, because Brooke was a teacher there. Do you have any memories of this gig happening?
No, I don't.
They mostly played like Moody Blues, Rolling Stones, and Tull covers at the time. So I'm not even sure if this predates your involvement with them. I think this was 1971 that this took place.
Yes, I don't remember it. I don't remember knowing about it. And of course, they were another band before they took the name Wicked Lester. They had a couple other names. So I'm not connected to that at all.
So out of that whole band, Gene and Paul are clearly the ones that have the most drive and the most ambition, and they stand out to you, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They were the leaders. They were all equal people in the band, but they were the leaders. They did the speaking and they did the arrangements and so forth. So they were very active.
What did you think of the music that Wicked Lester was putting together at the time?
I liked it. I thought it was good. I thought on the second shot that I heard them, I thought it was quite good. They had some new material, and I thought they sounded good. I thought they had a very good opportunity to become a good pop rock band. And I was very, very surprised that Don rejected the album, because I thought there were a couple of potential hits on it, and I liked it very much.
A couple of those songs wound up being Kiss songs later on. Love Her All I Can and She also wound up being Kiss songs later on.
Yes.
But sorry to interrupt. I'm a nerd. I'm going to interject here and there. But so they decide they want to do this Kiss thing. At the time, Kiss has not been decided that that's the name yet. So it's basically down to Gene, Paul, and you, and they have to start putting out ads for musicians, right?
That's right. Now, this was an interesting thing that happened. I needed to get them some rehearsal space so that we could start to audition players. And it was very interesting that before I met them, I was working with a group called J.F. Murphy and Salt. They were on Columbia Records and but first MGM Records. But when I first moved to New York, they had been signed by MGM. Their producer had invited me to come to New York, manage this band. I had met these people through the Philadelphia Folk Festival that I was the producer of at the time. Anyway, so they were just signed by this producer to MGM, and the head was Mike Curb at that time. So I got because they came out with this record, and I got them a gig at the Fillmore East in New York, and a showcase gig there. I mean, a good gig there, and a young lady, a beautiful young lady, shows up by the name of Alice West. And she comes into the dressing room and introduces herself to me and says that she's Mike Curb's girlfriend, who is traveling back east because she's originally from New Jersey. And he told her that this band that he had signed that has this album out called J.F. Murphy and Free Flowing Salt was at the Fillmore East, and she should go check it out. So she came in, she met me, we sat together in the audience, she checked out the band, and that was that. She left. The band left MGM. MGM dropped them. The album didn't happen. So they left, and I continued with them on to Columbia and some other stuff. But I stayed in touch with Alice. She moved back. She left Mike Curb. She moved back to New Jersey. We got in touch, and we sort of hit it off a little bit. We dated a little bit. She was a wonderful companion. Then she came to work with me in my apartment office. And I told her I had this new group, just the two guys from Wicked Lester, and we needed to audition musicians. We needed some rehearsal space. And she popped up and said, I have a friend who's an antique dealer on East 23rd Street, right off Fifth Avenue. And I think it's number 10, East 23rd. And he's got a loft above his store that's empty. Let me go ask him about that. So she went and asked him and called me on the phone and said, Lou, he said you can use it. Now, there might have been a small rent involved. I've forgotten at this time. But she said, it's available. I said, wonderful. So I got in touch with Gene and Gene and Paul now, Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. And I said, I have the rehearsal studio. It's at 10 East 23rd Street. Let's go get set up and we'll start to audition. So we moved in there and we started to audition drummers first. And we heard some drummers. They were okay. They were good. And then finally, this guy walks in and he's all dressed up in nice clothes and cleanly shaven. And he sets up his drums and they look brand new. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, this guy can't be a rock and roll drummer. He's too clean. He must be a bar mitzvah musician. So I said, he probably won't be any good, but we'll audition him. He sits and he introduces it. He says his name is Criss, and I forgot where the guy found him. Criss, Peter. His first name is Peter, and his last name is Crisscuola. Yeah. That's what he told me, Crisscuola. Peter Crisscuola. So he sits down, the guy starts to jam, and he starts to play. Oh, my God. He was terrific. I couldn't believe it. This guy who looked so straight and out of rock and roll was absolutely the best we had heard. And I said to myself, he's the guy. When we finished the audition, everybody went home, and I called, I think I called Gene on the phone, and I said, Gene, tell me, what did you think of Peter? And he says, we liked him. I said, I'm going to tell you my opinion. I believe he's the guy. If you liked him, that's great. If you and Paul liked him, I think he is absolutely the guy. I thought he was terrific. And Gene said, yes, we're going to hire him. And the amazing thing was that when we finished the audition, Peter said to me, Lew, where do you live, uptown? I said, yes. He says, I'm going uptown. I have my car parked outside. Would you like a ride up to your apartment? I said, oh, that would be nice, Peter. Very nice. Yeah, I'm on West 69th Street. And he was going over Queensboro Bridge, which is just a couple of miles over. So he gave me a ride. He got in the car, and he had this very sad expression on his face. And I remember this. He was almost in tears. He said, Lew, I have to tell you something. I've been playing in bands for a while, and I'm getting married, and I think we're going to have children or something. He says, if I don't get this job and the band doesn't happen, I'm going to have to give up my music career. And I did something that a manager should never do. I said, Peter, don't worry about it. You are it. And he said, you really think so? I said, yes, I do. Now, as a manager, I should never have said that because it's a musician.
Well, now you have to convince Gene and Paul.
Right, yeah.
But I just felt I had to say that to him because he played so well, and I had feelings for him. I knew what he was saying, that he had been in this for a number of years, and he was planning on leaving music if he couldn't get a band and then be successful. So I said that to him to try to make him feel better. And then I said to myself, now I'm going to have to sell Gene and Paul, but I didn't have to sell them. That was the beauty of it. When I asked them what they thought he was excellent as well. And so we hired him.
Yeah. Well, and I think just as a Kiss fan, from a much younger Kiss fan, but from my study of the history of the band, like I got the impression that Paul and Gene valued Peter's experience, because Peter had already cut records and done plenty of bands. So even in like early radio broadcasts of shows that Kiss did in the early days, Peter's almost the band leader on the mic in the very first year or so of the band, it seems like.
Yes, might have been. They might have been that impressed. I didn't know that they knew that much about him. I was just in the room when he walked in, but he had it. It was just fantastic. So then we had to audition guitar players, and a number of them came through. And then finally this one guy comes in, and he opens his stuff, and they start to jam. And oh my God, what a spark. Just great. And I said, what's your name? He said, my name is Paul Frehley. So I said, oh, you sound great. And I'm sitting there with the guys listening to him, and they liked him very much too. And the audition was over. And I think it was Gene and Paul who said, yes, we'd like to hire you for the band. We think you're the right one. They said, Lew, what do you think? I said, I agree with you 100%. He sounds great. He's adding that spark that I think would be absolutely right for the band. And then I think it was Gene who said to him, well, Paul, we just have one little problem. Your name is Paul, and we now have a Paul in the band. So we need you to change your first name. Do you have any other names or nicknames or anything? And Paul said, well, as a matter of fact, my friends all call me Ace. So we said, oh, Ace. Okay, Ace Frehley. And then Peter said, and you know, I have to be honest with you, I think Crisscuola is a little too Italian for rock and roll. I'd like to drop the Kula and just leave my name Peter Criss. Wow. I'm sitting there with Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Ace Frehley, and Peter Criss.
Do you have any idea how jealous people all over the world are of you for getting to be there for all of those moments?
Amazing.
That's crazy.
It's amazing.
I'm not really. I haven't thought about it. It was just an experience in my life. It was just part of my career. But thank you for such a compliment.
But it's a tribute to you as well, because and Aaron and I are both. We've interviewed a lot of crew people that have worked behind the scenes, not just for Kiss but for other bands. And honestly, management, crew people, agents, those are the people that really keeps the machine rolling. And Kiss, like if you go back in that time, like they must have looked insane back then, like when they got started like that. and to have a group of people like you, not just Bill Aucoin and Sean Delaney, but also you and people like Alan Miller and people that go unsung. We'd like to give those people credit because, I mean, with KISS, it definitely was a team effort that got those guys over the finish line.
That is true. I'm happy that I worked with them in the very beginning, and I've always thought that Bill and Alan and Sean Delaney, Alan Miller and Sean Delaney did a marvelous job with them. I'll tell you a little bit about that. And Alan Miller was my best friend at the time.
Yeah, I was wanting to hear from you about him because there's not a whole lot out there publicly known about him.
He had managed a little group. He got into management. He lived in Queens, and he was. I had met him through the folk festival. He was working with the manager of the folk singer. Trying to think the one very, very popular songwriter and folk singer. Just can't think of her name for the time being. But
is it Laura Nero?
No, it was. I'll have to think of it. But anyway, he was working with them, like he was working with the manager in the office, and he came to the Philadelphia Folk Festival with these people. I met him. So when I was ready to move to New York to manage J.F. Murphy and Free Flowing Salt, I got in touch with him, and he welcomed me, and we became very instant, close friends. So then I was very close with him when he was offered this position by Bill. They had met, I think, in a bar somewhere downtown that they hung out at. And Bill was living with Sean Delaney. They were boyfriends. Mm-hmm. And then Alan Miller got involved. And Alan, as I say, was my best friend. Janice Ian, that's who it was, whose manager had employed Alan Miller in New York to help her. And so when I had Janice at the Folk Festival, Philadelphia Folk Festival, they all came from New York, and that's when I met them all and met Alan. And we hit it off. Anyway, so
yeah, Alan was a very important cog in the machine back then, and like I've seen a little bit of video footage. Like he was heavily involved in the whole KISS Comes to Cadillac, Michigan thing when the high school football team won. He was a big part of putting that whole thing together.
Yes.
And just like Bill and Sean get a lot of the praise, but like Alan Miller was a huge part of that.
Well, Bill Aucoin hired Alan to be in charge of promotion and publicity. So he started the KISS Army. He started the KISS cartoon magazine. He was into all of that sort of thing. He did a fabulous job. But after, I was just going to finish up by telling you, after we got started rehearsing with the band, because we had hired Ace and Peter. Now we had the four guys. They started working every day. And, of course, they had no money, no work, no money or anything. And one or two of them were standing on the corner with their guitar cases open collecting quarters. Gene and Paul were living at home with their parents in Queens. So everything was just starting from scratch, and I mean scratch. So they started to play, and when we saw that it was going to happen, that they would work together, it all worked. After rehearsal, we said, well, it's time we came up with a name for this group. And so we sat around in a circle, and as I'm talking to you, I'm right there seeing them all, and sitting across from Paul, and Gene's over to my left. And somebody said this name and that name and this name and that name. And finally, it might have been Paul. I'm not sure. I don't remember. It might have been who said, how about a name like KISS? And I said, oh, KISS. Well, now, do you mean the KISS? Or do you mean the Kisses, the four of you? And I remember him saying, no, I mean just one word, KISS, not the or plural, but just KISS by itself. So we looked around and I said, how do you guys feel? I went to each one. How do you think about that? Yeah, I like that. That would be nice. Yeah, that would be nice. That would be nice. Okay, the band's name is KISS.
Gene likes to say that he suggested the word fuck as the band name, and then everyone said no.
He might have, and today that would probably work.
Right.
Yeah. It would get a lot of attention.
Yeah, I would probably be accepted on commercial areas today. You hear it everywhere. But and you know what? He might have. I just don't recall that.
So you didn't sit around and say this means knights in Satan's service. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Oh, no, not at all. and there was another one that they said KISS, kids in
kids in Satan's service,
something like, or kids in something else. I've heard that over the years. No, it just meant kiss, just a kiss, yeah. And that's what it was. And we named the group Kiss, and then we started rehearsing. And then after they had enough material together to begin to work somewhere, I started to work with them to get them showcases and to get some work. Shall I continue with the story a little bit?
Yeah, please.
Yes.
So I began to get them a little work, and they started to put on a little makeup. So and I wanted to see if some record companies might be interested in them. So I began to showcase them here and there, and I couldn't find a record company that was interested. People who saw them didn't care for them. They were just four guys, no costumes, no image, just four guys. And they began to do a little makeup, a little eye, a little lipstick, kind of like the New York Dolls type of thing, just a little special look. But they were playing music that it wasn't that great. It was just a number of things, and I figured I'd showcase them and see if somebody will hear some things that are really good. So got them a couple of showcases, and I wanted to get them begin to get them a little paid work. So J.F. Murphy and what became J.F. Murphy and Salt, we dropped the Free Flowing, became J.F. Murphy and Salt when they went to Columbia. They were from Queens, and before I came to New York, and they had worked at a place that they told me called the Daisy. Trying to think of the little town. But anyway, Amityville. That's right. Amityville in Long Island. And they had worked at the Daisy, and they knew the manager, the owner. His name was Sid Benjamin. And I said, maybe I'll call him. If that's all right with you guys, I'm going to call him, see if maybe I can introduce myself. So I called him, introduced myself, and told him about this group. And I said, I know you. I'm working with J.F. Murphy now. And he told me about you. Would you, that's Sid Benjamin right there in the picture that you just put on my screen. That is Sid with the group after a period of time, however. So I talked with Sid, and he said, yes, I'll give the guys a showcase here. So we set up the date, and we went out and played the showcase. It didn't go very well. They just weren't that good. For them, just like that. It just wasn't happening. But anyway, I got back home, and I where I lived in the apartment house in New York, I was the head of the tenants committee that would be in touch with the landlord when we needed to have things done, washing machines, painting, repairs. I was the one that would be in touch with the owners. They're very nice people. And so it came time that our hallways needed to be repapered with wallpaper. So happened that Sid Benjamin was a wallpaperer by career, and the club that he ran, the Daisy in Amityville, was his hobby. So I called Sid. I said, Sid, I'm very grateful to you for giving the group some showcasing. I've got some paper hanging work here in Manhattan that needs to be done. Would you like to do it? And he said, yeah. So he came in, took all the measurements, we selected a design, and then we had a little work pattern for a little while where he would come into my apartment house at 9 o'clock in the morning, work till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and go home to Queens. Then at 7 o'clock at night, go to Amityville and open the Daisy. And I would then drive from Manhattan with either by myself or with somebody else out to the Daisy to be with him and Kiss at the Daisy at night. So he would be at my place in the morning, I'd be at his place at night, each working for each other, providing a little income on both sides. It was really a nice thing.
That's the rock and roll barter system.
That's it. So anyway, they worked for a while with him, and then I tried to get them a record deal. I couldn't find any interest. And so I felt, and I was not in love with the music they were doing at that time. It wasn't my type of music. I was into very beautiful songs beautiful arrangements, orchestrations, and so forth. It's just my own taste. And what they were doing, I didn't feel I could really help them much more than I had done at that point. And they agreed. And so we agreed that they should find a new manager. Well, they found Bill Aucoin. And Bill was a guy who had a TV show on called Flipside on TV in New York. So he had some money. And I didn't have any money at that time. I was just getting by, managing my acts, paying all the bills and doing what I had to do. But I didn't have tons of money saved in the bank. Bill, however, did. Bill was very successful. And so he liked the group. They liked him. He signed them. He was with Sean Delaney. And then he signed up Alan, as we talked about earlier, he signed up Alan Miller to work in publicity. And that was wonderful. We all stayed in touch. I was at Bill's office a few times. I was in touch with Alan all the time. The members of the band, not Peter or Ace, but Paul and Gene would call me on the phone every couple of weeks, every few weeks, to let me know what was happening, or what Bill was doing, where they were going. He got them a record deal with his friend Neil Bogart, who was leaving Buddha Records and starting his own label called Casablanca. And so he was friends with Bill Aucoin. And he did Bill a favor, and he took, when I say a favor, I mean they were friends, and he signed Kiss, I believe, as the first act on Casablanca. Mm-hmm. He then hired some very well-known producers. I forget whom they were at the time, but they were very successful, to produce an album. They produced it, he released it, and it flopped.
Yeah.
He produced a second album with them, and it flopped. So like 2 years, a year or two later, after we had separated. And then, at that point then, Gene and the others came to the conclusion that they had to make some changes in the band. They needed to write some different kind of material. They had to create an image. This was very important to them, an image that people would see and know and like. And they came up with the idea, and I don't know who did it, came up with the idea of the cartoon characters and the personalities with each one, combined that with some new material, and began to gain some attention. And they would call me on the phone and tell me what was happening. I was thrilled to hear it. And then they would call me and tell me, we're in Los Angeles, we're in Chicago, and I was thrilled to hear it. And Bill, and I give him all the credit for this, and unfortunately all of them are gone. Bill Aucoin, Sean Delaney, Alan Miller, I'm trying to think, Sid Benjamin, the lawyer that I turned them on to, Stanley Snedowski, was my closest friend in New York, was my lawyer.
Another very notable person.
My lawyer, from the moment I came into New York, I met him. It's a story there, but I turned Kiss on to him, and he was Kiss's lawyer for a long period of time. And the point is that Bill invested $200,000 of his money out of his pocket in the group to take them on tour around the country from place to place, where they were only earning $500 a night, but the cost to travel and hotels, and $200,000 50 years ago, today, that would be $2 million.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that kind of money, but Bill did. And he invested it because of what they were doing. And I would be at the Bottom Line with Stan Snedowski, who was the owner of the nightclub, The Bottom Line. He was my lawyer, but he was also the owner of the nightclub. And I'd bump into Sean Delaney week after week, and he would stand there and tell me what the band was doing. They're doing this, they're getting that, so forth. And it was just thrilling. I was so happy to hear it. And I would hear it from the guys. Finally, after the two albums flopped, they got with Eddie Kramer, who was the partner owner of Electric Lady. And Eddie was becoming a very well-known producer. So they got with Eddie, and they decided to produce Kiss Alive. And he went with them to Detroit, and in the concert hall there,
Cobo
Hall, that's right, I forgot the name, Cobo Hall, he recorded them live, then brought it back to New York and did some editing and some adding and subtracting in the studio in New York. And he produced Kiss Alive. The combination of that record with their image, their exposure on the tour dates, and the new material that they had written broke the group.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to tell you one thing that I have used in my sales training and my work that I've done ever since I moved out of the music business. I've always talked about the most important thing in sales is the recipe for success. Has 8 ingredients. I won't go over them, but the 8th ingredient, I would always say, is the most important, more important than all the rest. It's called persistence. In sales and in business, the most important thing is called persistence. And I would always speak to my classes in that because I became a member of the faculty at Pierce College out here in Los Angeles and taught thousands of salespeople around the world in automotive sales, real estate sales, and so forth. I learned a lot from my music business, of course, but I would say that that's the most important thing. I never mentioned Kiss to anybody. My time with Kiss, I never mentioned it because I don't want to brag or I wasn't responsible for their success. I was responsible for creating, getting them started, but it was Bill and them. They were responsible for their success. Absolutely. So I never said anything to anybody. But internet started to happen. This is the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. Internet starts happening. And I'm teaching a class out here in Los Angeles in a big hotel. I've got about 200 people in this class. And I'm speaking at the podium and showing things on the blackboard. And I say, like I did at every class, are there any questions? And a guy raises his hand in the back of the room. And I said, yes. He says, tell me, are you the Lew Linet who managed Kiss?
Awesome.
And this is back in the early 90s when they were at the very top, of course. I said, oh, my God. Yes. How did you know that? He says, because we have this internet thing and this Google thing, and I put your name in. I Googled your name, and this came up with Lew Linet with Kiss that you managed. You were in the music business and you managed. I said, oh, my God. You could see everyone's jaw in that room on the table and staring at me like you couldn't believe. And he said, tell us the story. So I just took a few minutes and told him about this. All right. I went home. I said to myself, boy, that's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. That'll never happen again. 2 weeks later, I'm in a classroom at a dealership, and one of the kids in the class, or salespeople, one of the new salespeople says to me, are you the Lew Linet who managed Kiss? Somebody told me about it. I said, oh, my God, yes. Wow. And I couldn't believe I heard it again. I started to hear it time after time, at which point I said to myself, this is something of value. I've never said anything about it for 20 years, but now it's all come back from these people asking me these questions. Maybe there's something I can add to my sales training that includes Kiss that would help all these people that I'm training to help them do well. Maybe there's some value. So I thought about it, and then it dawned on me. I remembered the time we were in rehearsal hall in the very beginning, before Bill Aucoin, before any other, just in the rehearsal hall, just getting the band together, and I'm getting them a couple of showcases, and they were doing poorly. They're getting bad reviews. And I remember getting a review in the New York Times or the Village Voice. It was kind of a bad review, but with ideas, what was wrong with the band, reporter thought, reviewer. And I brought it to the rehearsal. And at the end of the rehearsal, I called Gene over. And, at this time, the band had no agent, no work, no record deal, no publishing, and no money, just living off their parents and off the street and rehearsing. And I said to Gene, Gene, I think I need to show you this. This is the review that just came out in the New York Times. I think you ought to see it because there are some things that might be valuable. So he looks at it, and these were his words. As I am standing here today, I am standing here 50 years ago in the rehearsal looking in Gene's eyes. He looked at this and he said these exact words. Lew, don't worry about that at all. We are going to be the biggest rock band in the world. Those were his words. I looked back. Everything was, they had failed at the one label. They had failed at the second label. They failed at Epic. They had failed at Casablanca up to that point. And they had nothing going. And here I'm trying to get something started for them, trying to showcase a little bit. And this was his comment. Don't worry about a thing. Don't worry about it. We are going to be the biggest rock band in the world. I couldn't believe that he said that, but I thought, oh, well, if that's what he thinks, okay. 6-7 years later, persisting, sacrificing, investing every minute of their time, every penny that they ever had, and they had only pennies. And finally, with Bill and Gene and Alan, and with new material, and with Eddie Kramer, and with the idea that hit them for the image and the characters, and all of that, 7 years later, by 1980, 81, whatever, there they are, the biggest rock band in the world.
Because they believed in themselves. They really, truly believed it.
Right, and they didn't give up. And when I thought of this, after training salespeople and people asking me, aren't you the guy? Are you the guy that worked with you? And I thought to myself, how can I use that? Maybe because they're all knowing it. They're learning it. Maybe there's a value there. I thought to myself, my God, the last thing I talk about in my motivational hour with them is persistence. And if there was ever an example of persistence that I had ever seen in my life, there was nothing ever that I had seen like this and witnessed it with my own eyes and being a little part of it. And I thought to myself, here when I'm talking to my classes from now on, I'm not going to quote some motivational speaker who wrote something in a book somewhere. Here I'm going to tell them the story and show them what persistence is. And ever since then, to this day, I have used the story. So now in my schedule for my training, where at the very end, where I say all of these ingredients, the ingredients to success, the 8 ingredients, and I have now written persistence -KISS. And when I speak to them, I tell them this story. And it's usually fun because I'll say, I want to tell you a little bit about persistence. And I just say, I was working with a rock band in New York a few years ago, and this kind of happened and that kind of happened. And they finally did this and did that, and it worked out and they became successful. And I wait for somebody to say, well, wait, who is the band? Can you tell us the name? Have you ever heard of a band called KISS? And oh my God, the mouths open, the jaws open. They go, oh my God, KISS? You're talking? Yes. And then I know that I made my point and that they will understand from firsthand exactly what persistence is and what happens if you don't give up in life. But do what you love to do and persist at it, and you will be successful. And that's the best example I've ever had. And I've been so proud of them ever since.
I love it.
That's amazing.
I love it. That's amazing. Yeah, just a little band called KISS. Amazing.
No, that's awesome that they're like the prime example of persistence pays off, and that sums up their entire career. Because Aaron got into them when they were still kind of in the glory days. I got into them when they had no makeup and no one really cared about them. And like even through those years, they still stayed competitive with all the other bands in the market, and they just kept pushing through. And that is Gene and Paul's biggest great trait is those guys don't know how to quit. It's just not in their DNA.
Absolutely. And I've worshiped that. I've thought about it for over 50 years, and I've communicated that to literally thousands of people who have been in my classes and studied my videotapes on sales and so forth all around the world in English-speaking countries. I've been so happy to know that people are seeing that, and I've never forgotten that. I've been so proud of them. I was so happy for them. It was just wonderful. And we stayed in touch. over the years. Now and then I talk to them about a couple of things, a couple of projects here and there. Haven't talked to Gene for a while, but I talked with Paul a few times. And it's just great to have been involved with them. I'm so happy.
And you are thanked in the credits of Gene's 78 solo album.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. I was surprised. I think he sent me, I think I talked with him on the phone, and he either sent me a copy or somehow somebody sent me a copy, and I'm reading, and I see on the back list of credits, people, I guess, who were involved in his career and so forth, and there's my name. And I thought, oh, how nice that he thought of me that way.
So cool.
That's amazing. But no, I just love that whole era of the New York rock scene, and you talking about the bad reviews and how people were just basically turned off by them early on. It really does kind of explain the disdain they had for critics going forward, and it was an uphill battle for them the whole time with critics. But it just, I think that also understates the persistence of those guys. It's like you could say whatever bad you wanted about them. They're like, just talk about me in the paper. That's all we care about.
You're right. Right. And as I said, the music that they did was not my personal type of music, but I appreciated the fact that everybody has different tastes, and I respect everybody's taste. Some people like this kind of music, some people that, some people like this and that, all different kinds of things. And I respect everybody's taste. And I was so happy to see that they found such a huge audience of people who enjoyed them on the various levels, the music level, the visual levels, the speaking levels, the ideas that they would talk about. So it was wonderful for them. And I've remained so happy for them ever since.
So would it be safe to say it was not a shock to you that Gene and Paul wound up kind of climbing the mountain the way they did?
No, it was not a shock. Having worked with them the time that I did and knowing how they were, calling me on the phone, we have a new idea, Lou, we're leaving this band, we've got an idea, stick with us, we want to put this together, and then changing my name, this will be more rock and roll, and that'll be more rock and roll, and we're going to do this. And then after failing for a year or two with the first two, failing with the Wicked Lester, but then failing it with Kiss, failing as Kiss with 2 albums, not giving it up, not firing anybody, but saying we have to develop, we have to enlarge, we have to create within ourselves something that will be better than what we've been doing, and add to what we've been doing. We need to do it ourselves, and they did it, and it was just absolutely amazing.
It's quite a story, and just knowing that you were there at the very beginning. I mean, it's those of us that are fans, we loved all that stuff of the era that they were struggling. We had a friend, Rick Fox, who went on to have a good music career. He was dating Peter's sister in those early days and would hang out at the 10 East 23rd Street Loft. And we love talking about people that were on site during those times, just because it had to have been a very exciting thing to go through, because there was so much unknown at the time. It was like, how is this going to play out? And it must have just been fun spitballing ideas for what this crazy new band was going to do.
Yes, and they are the ones who did it, really, because they did it after they got with Bill Aucoin. With me, it was just doing what they were doing and trying to get them a record deal and having problems with it. And then when they went with Bill, they continued doing what they were doing with me, and it didn't work. So then they decided they had to make changes and they had to evolve, and they did so, and that was great. There's and they loved what they were doing. That's one of the most important things. There is a motivational speaker a few years ago, I forget his name, years ago, but who made up the phrase, do what you love and you never work a day in your life. And I've used that phrase. I borrowed that phrase from him and used that in all of my training. Do what you love and you never work a day in your life. And at the time that I was working with them, I loved what I was doing. They loved what they were doing. And they continued to love what they were doing. And as a result, it was just pleasure all the time for them, getting the costumes together and the makeup and the characters that they would portray on stage, and hearing the reactions from the kids in the audience. It was just terrific. And I remember after they had the big record with Kiss Alive, and then they toured a bit. Then they got their first job at Madison Square Garden. And I remember either Gene or Paul called me on the phone and said, Lew, we've got a date. We're headlining Madison Square Garden. We want you to come. We've reserved a box for all of our important friends over the years. And you'll be with this and with Eddie and with this one and that one. We want you to come. Please come to the garden and see us. And so I went. And what they did so well. They were absolutely terrific. And the audience loved them. And it was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and I heard you tell that story at the Daisy reunion. So you said it was in that box you had you, Sid Benjamin from the Daisy, and several other people that were there at the very beginning. Yes. And Eddie Kramer was there. Eddie Kramer also
was there, and a few others that were involved in the beginning that launched them, so to speak. And they wanted us all there, and we were there. We were honored. We were given a box, a celebrity box, so to speak, and they did their act, and it was just terrific. The audience loved them.
You must have felt like a proud papa watching that.
Well, in a way, yeah, a little bit, but I just very happy for them. I was happy to see that they,
And that was the big gig for them, was finally getting to headline the Garden. I know.
Oh yeah, that was fabulous.
And I want to bring up one more thing before we wrap up here. Just to give an example of Sid Benjamin's sense of humor. I found an old Daisy flyer. Kiss is not on this one, but it just cracks me up because at the top it says, "The Daisy, Long Island's strangest nightclub, rotten food, cheap booze, warm beer, and lousy bands."
I've never seen that. This is the first time I see that. That is great, and I see the names here.
Well, I'm really interested in Dick Slick and the Licks. I'm wondering where I can pick up one of their albums.
That's very funny. It's very funny what you say there. And this just comes to mind. I mean, it has nothing to do with this. But there's a restaurant that my wife Noelle and I go to frequently here in Los Angeles. We used to go there on Saturday nights all the time. We still go there. But an old guy used to stand up in the room, in the middle of the dining room, at Saturday night. And he'd stand up and he'd say, "Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye." Everybody would turn around, look. "The food here stinks. The employees are terrible. And we're coming back tomorrow night." And everybody would start to laugh like hell because it was a wonderful restaurant. But he would do this on Saturday nights. Yeah. "This is terrible. That's terrible. This is terrible. But we'll be back tomorrow night." And that's what you just showed me in that flyer. Reminded me of that.
What was the vibe like if you were a concert goer at one of the shows at the Daisy?
Well, the band just would get up and play. The people were sitting, they'd have some food to eat. So they'd just be sitting around the tables and the band would just get up and play a set and then take a break and then come back 20 minutes later for another set. And the audience was, they didn't seem that excited. It was just, to them, was just a local band. They were there for something to eat. They didn't have to pay $5 for a ticket to go to Madison Square Garden at that time. $5 here, they could get in here for nothing or just a drink for 50 cents or something like that. And it was just a local club to go and have a little drink and hear some local band.
Yeah, there's a funny. Well, it's not really that funny, but there's a conspiracy theory going around amongst Kiss fans because it was in Amityville. And it was timing-wise, it would have worked out. There were some people theorized that Ronald DeFeo, who committed the Amityville house murders, could have been in the audience at one of those shows.
Oh, I have no idea. No idea at all. But
I don't know.
But I was very, very happy and fortunate to have had that contact with Sid Benjamin. He was a terrific guy. He was such a nice guy.
That's cool. And I love that they did the Daisy anniversary thing at the bar that was close to it the few years back. That was cool that you got to do that.
Yes, it was a promoter.
I know the fans ate it.
Yeah, it was a promoter who called me out of the blue and said his name. I forget it. And he said that he represents a group called something like the Unmasked or something like that. It's the name of the group. Mm-hmm. And it was a Kiss tribute band. And he wanted to have this 43rd or 45th anniversary of them at the Daisy. And the Daisy was gone. But he wanted to have this at a bar that was right next door to the Daisy, a restaurant that was still there. And he wanted to have his band play. It's a tribute to Kiss. And he knew about me. And he found my phone number from somewhere, and he called and asked if I would please come and be the star of the show and talk about Kiss. And I said I was too busy in a certain project. I couldn't get there the night that I couldn't fly in from L.A. But if he wanted to do something on video, I said we could do that. He said, "Oh yes, absolutely." So we set up Zoom, and he interviewed me for about an hour, and I told these stories and some other stuff, and it seemed to go very well. The audience seemed to love it. And then the next thing I knew, I saw it was online. He didn't tell me it was going online. I just saw it there, and it's been up online now for 8 years or something, or 7 years. Yeah. And I don't know how many millions of people have looked at it, but it's been there ever since. Yeah.
Yeah, and I that between that and as I mentioned in our email last week, I just saw a thread on Kiss FAQ's message board, and somebody had run into you randomly, I think at a shopping center.
Yeah, just 2 weeks ago. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I'm at the Westlake Mall in Topanga Canyon here in Los Angeles with Noelle, and she's shopping at the clothing store, and this girl comes walking down the aisle wearing this beautiful Kiss sweatshirt. So I said, "Oh, hello there. I noticed you have a Kiss sweatshirt. Do you like that band? Are you a fan? Do you like that band?"